name is Lauren Paler, and I am one of the co-founders of Focus on Health. We are an organization based in the US that advocates for the health and wellness of the food and beverage industry. So we're really excited to be here today with these lovely panelists that I will introduce to you shortly to talk about environmental health. So our earth, ourselves, nature, and your personal environment. We're working with Perrier to discuss Mindfulness Matters, which is our Dry January initiative. We believe that Dry January is an amazing, amazing implementation, but we really want to talk about how to sustain that mindset and what we can do after 30 days. So that is why we are here today. So I'm going to start off talking a little bit about physical environmental factors, because I think that when we talk about the environment, the first thing we take into consideration is pollution or sustainable practices, or sustainability, I should say. And those are great, but just to differentiate all of the expertise that we have here today discussing on different factors, I think it's important to make a very distinctive statement for both of these types of environmental factors that we will be discussing. So physical environmental factors contributing to mental illness are those that have the power to affect a person's biology or neurochemistry, thereby increasing their chances of developing a disorder. For example, if a person lacks to health-related resources such as a whole nutrient-rich food, and they tend to eat more processed and refined foods, they are probably more likely to develop some sort of complication with their body. That is just science, right? What we're talking about is social environmental factors. Social environmental factors refer to socioeconomic, racial and ethnic, and relational conditions that may influence a person's ability to cope with stress. So a good example is not having a strong social support system, maybe not going outside and having Mother Nature touch their hearts and souls. So those are two really great examples. Additionally, we have the other side of environmental wellness, which is sustainability. And we see that implemented in our bars, and it most definitely can be implemented in our homes. We talk about waste reduction, we talk about pollution. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce the experts today that will be discussing a lot of these different topics. I'm going to start off with Karina Martinez. So Karina grew up listening to Blue Collar Woes and the smell of diner coffee at her dad's Greasy Spoon in Northern California, while her mom ran her own catering company. The hustle was strongly embedded. While a strong work ethic surely helped in the preparation for world-class nationals, lush life leadership, and grinding behind the stick for 12 years, it didn't lead to the healthiest life. The pile up of long hours, unhealthy habits, and toxic relationships turned her back to her childhood backyard, the forest. Through nature, therapy, and physical exercise, she's been able to reconnect with hospitality in its wholeness. All right, thank you, Karina, for being here. The next person I'm going to introduce is Monica Berg. So Monica Berg is a Norwegian bartender, liquor company owner, and digital innovator in London. She is originally from Norway, received the Linné Honorary Award for her contributions to Norwegian food and culture in 2015, and in 2019 received the Altos Bartender Award at the world's 50 best bars, making her the first woman to be given the award. Y'all need to try saying that 10 times fast. It is not easy. She owns the Chair and Elementary in London, with her partner Alex Cortina. Berg has her own liquor line, Muyu, co-founded the nonprofit Pour, and co-created Back of House, a digital platform used by hospitality workers to anonymously report discrimination, harassment, and other issues, which is amazing. Y'all definitely need to check it out. Berg's cocktails often center around fresh seasonal ingredients. She works with local farmers in the UK to source ingredients for her cocktails at Taylor and Elementary. She works with what she describes a collective effort with other staff members to create cocktails instead of each bartender creating their own individual drinks. Berg also wants to make cocktails accessible. So she uses a test called "Would you serve this to your mother?" which I love, to decide if the beverage should make the Chair and Elementary menu. And something that's worth noting, and one of the reasons that she's here, besides all of this wonderful stuff we just discussed, is growing up, her family spent a lot of time outdoors, hunting, fishing, mushroom hunting. So those experiences really influenced the way that she has bartended in current day. So thank you, Monica, for being here.
Thank you.
All right. Yeah. We have Laura Lashley next, no stranger to nature. So Laura is a lover of nature, food, and drink, and is the national brand educator for Seedlip in the United States. She is an expert in trade affinity, outreach, brand education, and mixology. Over the past decade, she has formed essential partnerships with industry influencers and leveraged existing relationships for prestigious cocktail programs in New York City and abroad, and she is now based in California, creating events and taking Seedlip, the world's first distilled non-alcoholic spirit, to the masses. So for those of you who don't know, Seedlip is a nature company on a mission to solve the dilemma of what to drink when you're not drinking. Seedlip is the world's first distilled non-alcoholic spirit, and Laura really takes her knowledge of the brand and the product to develop training programs and planning, executing ways to really implement knowledge and strategies where people can take advantage of all the things that nature have to offer. So thank you for being here, Laura. All right, and then last but not least, we have Amy Junkai. So Amy is a Vermonter, currently residing in Washington, D.C. After graduating from the University of Vermont with a degree in math and statistics, she has worked across the board, from human rights and refugee advocacy to the hospitality industry. Amy is a former officer of the DC Craft Bartenders Guild and has been a bartender for over a decade. Amy cultivates strong community connections in an engaging and educational manner, from agriculture responsibility to environmental sustainability and community engagement to cultural immersion. Amy is now a senior ambassador for Bar Hill and Caledonia Spirits and serves as team lead for their internal diversity, equity, and inclusion committee. She's a member of the Zero Waste Committee and the DC Sierra Club and of Bartenders Against Racism. Man, girl, you have a lot on your plate. Upon seeing a need for restorative wellness amongst protesters at Black Lives Matter Plaza in front of the White House, Amy began to coordinate a midnight yoga series. Thanks to the community and local studios for their generous donations of yoga mats, a spectacular local DJ who donated his time and equipment to provide music and microphones, as well as the energetic and passionate yoga instructors, Midnight Yoga provided a much needed space for healing after a long day of protesting in the hot summer sun. In addition to providing this mental wellness for protesters, it also was a way to engage the community in a peaceful community connection while outdoors and socially distant. It only took 2 sessions to go from 35 to 200 participants, and it was clear how much this space was needed. So thank you, Amy, for being here. So clearly we have a very versatile bunch, and I'm really excited to see what they all have to offer in this discussion. But, I wanted to start the conversation off with Karina, simply starting by stating, why are we talking about this? Karina, you want to unmute yourself for me?
There we go. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Thank you for all those introductions and gathering us all together. So why are we talking about this? I think for me personally, we live in a very developed bar system with taxations and different distributions, and that's kind of our common ground. But the world that we live in is much more than that. And I think often we feel very disconnected from nature and the resources that we're actually pulling from, because essentially everything when we tip a bottle is just distilled plant life. It is something that comes through our bars, but it's something that we don't really think about as far as the raw ingredients and the sourcing. We like to talk whimsically and romantically about malts and esters and fermentation, but at the base of it, it all starts to grow somewhere. And identifying what that is and how it helps us and affects us both in our understanding, but also making us whole, and the different platforms on which that involves, for me, is why we're all here talking about this. I think it's all affected us differently in our personal lives as well as in our professional lives. And I would love to hear from the panelists on how that's affected you and how connecting with nature or looking at raw ingredients and resources where everything start from, and kind of where that goes for you personally and independently. Monica, would you like to start?
Well, I agree that there is a disconnect between ourselves and nature, and especially if you think about it in the context of food and drinks in that sense. But ultimately, I think it's also about respect. And unfortunately, you see that if you look at the numbers now, more than half of the world's foods are being wasted just because they're not pretty enough, they're not sold within the date that they're packaged or something like this. But it's just become such a wasteful mindset and culture where we don't really care about the food that we eat unless we have the privilege of wasting it. So, you know, you have those that are fortunate enough to be able to go to amazing restaurants and experience amazing bars and drinks. But then you also have the majority of people where people no longer know how to cook. They don't know how to feed themselves. They don't know how to grow things. They don't know how to, really appreciate what we have around us. And I know from, for example, from when I grew up, you would say call it foraging now, and it's super trendy. But when I grew up, foraging was not fun. It was just something you did every single weekend with your family to be able to feed yourself throughout the year, at a cheaper price. I grew up fishing, so most of, for example, the fall and the winter, you would go out, spend 7 hours every single Friday, Saturday, and Sunday fishing to fill up your freezer with all of the kind of free bounty that the ocean will give you. But it wasn't fun, and the amount, the kind of food that we would, or fish or seafood that you would get is the kind of food that normally would be thrown away. But now, for example, people pay a premium of some of these things. Monkfish, halibut used to be given away for free at the docks because it was so ugly. Cod would be sold for like nothing just because it was, so common. But then also you go out in the forest, you pick, and you learn that everything has a price, but that price is not always money. Sometimes it's time, it's effort, it's knowledge, and we need to learn how to appreciate those people that have that knowledge. For example, why is the farmers the most underappreciated link in our whole kind of chain? Why is, for example, and I don't know if it's inappropriate to address this so early in the conversation, but why does farmers have some of the highest suicide rates in the world, where in certain countries, for example in Europe, there's double digits of farmers killing themselves every week because of the pressure that they are under, because we want our food cheaper and cheaper, whilst we all say we want organic, free range, cruelty free, everything. But at the end of the day, what we do is that we go to the supermarkets, we pay for this £1, £2, I don't know the conversion to dollars, but it's really cheap meats, and I can guarantee you that were not grown or raised in these conditions. So we need to kind of, I don't know, put our money where our mouth is and actually pay for what we say we want, and to kind of support the people that are actually on the fields, in the mountains or by the ocean, and providing this to us. So yeah, absolutely, we need to learn how to kind of respect nature, but also respect the people that are giving us or providing for us, I think.
I think those are all amazing points, and I think it does draw to this idea that you're saying is there are a lot of, especially with social media, especially with where our leisure dollars are going to, of this whimsical idea about foraging and fishing and being connected and having that purposeful day of having your hands in the soil, or being able to go to the ocean and see what gifts it gives. And it all seems whimsical and fanciful and lovely, but that's when it's when it is leisurely and when it's at our disposal, not when it is the way of life, not when it is hand to mouth, and that is the getting up every day and tilling the soil and weeding and checking on crops and seeing, you know, what the weather forecast is going to bring, and the stress of that dependence on Mother Nature and the reciprocal relation to it. I grew up in a middle of nowhere town of 1,000 people where the only source of heat was a wood burning stove. And if we start talking about sustainability and logging, and we think about our sources of heat and the today's variability of what that can be depending on technology, location, and amount of money, and you look at how those intertwine. And for me, growing up in Northern California, we have a large population of nut trees. But with that large population, it's also not a very environmentally friendly crop, including pulling up mature trees that are a profit crop. But what do you do with it? You just do control burns and you get rid of all of these stumps and all of these trees, when you can be outreaching to your community and having people who use wood as a source of heat to come and cut that and give back and just kind of give it away. Like you're talking about monkfish or things that are not considered pretty enough or packaged properly in order to give it out. And there are things within our community that we can rely on one another, but I think each region does it a little bit differently, and sharing those ideas and those struggles and stripes and prosperity, I think, between different regions definitely expands our options and leave us with more connection. Amy, you're from Vermont. I had the privilege of spending only a week there, and I really loved kind of how resourceful and how connected people were to their environment in comparison with what I see in California. Would you like to speak to that at all?
Absolutely. I am very fortunate to have grown up in Vermont. I loved my time there. I lived there until I was 24. I currently live in Washington, D.C. And coming to DC from Vermont, after only having lived also in Germany, who's also very, very responsible about the way that they engage with the environment, it was shocking the first time that I walked into a restaurant and asked where the wine bottles went, and they just pointed to the trash can like I was crazy. And Vermont is an incredible place because so much of the legislation comes directly from the people. We have a very unique ability to have a very strong hand in our legislation and in our policy that really defines the way that we engage with the environment, because it's such a small state. There's only 600,000 people in the whole state of Vermont, which is less than the entire city of Washington, D.C. There's not a lot of people there. Because of that, you know your local representatives, and you just have a stronger sense of community. The largest city in Vermont is Burlington, which is 40,000 people, which is not a city by most people's metrics, just 40,000 people. But because of that, they have this really unique ability to really connect really strongly and make really powerful implementations and create these incredible designs to really be beneficial both for the community and also for the environment that we exist within. I believe it was, I don't want to misspeak, but it was, I think it was at the end of 2016, I believe that Burlington, Vermont became the first city in the United States to run entirely on renewable energy, which is such an important step as we continue to move towards trying to become increasingly more carbon neutral in the way that we exist and move through this world. Composting is now mandated, so it is illegal in Vermont to put recycling, compost, or yard debris inside of your trash cans. And that there's lots of incredible important steps, but when you're in Vermont, you don't realize that you just live in this tiny little bubble, and that outside of it, people just don't pay as much attention to it. In Vermont, the farmers markets are incredibly important. Buying local is incredibly important. The tagline "Made in Vermont" holds so much weight in Vermont, and we really like stand by our producers and our farmers and making sure that we're paying a fair price to farmers. And that's so important. And that kind of mentality and that energy and the way that that is reflected in policy that allows those types of industries to thrive in a smaller community is something that I really hope that in the future, more states and more communities are able to take those lessons from that and reciprocate those in a larger and more impactful way.
Thank you for sharing. Something that both you and Monica touched on was really paying the price for what's important for us. We talk a lot about what our priorities are or what we would like it to be, yet we don't want to pay the price to actually make it happen and come to fruition. Yet so many of us are willing to pay $5 or $6 on a Starbucks 2 to 3 times a day. That just adds to the landfill, but we can't have enough empathy and foresight to be able to put that money into something sustainable like our farms or putting dollars back into our community. And it is interesting to see that diversification of waste and how it works, like you're talking about where to put your wine bottle. I think my biggest shock for that in the United States was going to Vegas and doing a pop-up and at the end of the night and realizing everything goes in the same trash can, and thinking about Vegas, whose tagline is America's Playground and who is mainly an entertainment hub, that there is no separation. It's just all going to one landfill. And I know that there's arguments about recycling systems and how beneficial it is or not, and looking at that, but it was definitely a shock. Laura, you have so much experience in different areas globally, but also within our communities and within our careers. What would you like to add to the why we're here and how it affects us and the agendas that we're looking at?
Yeah, thanks. I'm really happy to be part of this discussion. I think for me personally, it's been in my kind of awareness around nature and sustainability and all the things we're talking about has kind of been an evolving process. I grew up in Colorado where like nature is kind of a foregone conclusion. You know, I went hiking and camping with my family on the weekends. And I didn't really love it, or at least I thought I didn't love it. I thought it was like something my parents made us do. And I'd rather be like, you know, shopping with my friends or playing video games or whatever as a teenager. I think I didn't appreciate the access to nature that I had. And then I moved to New York City and I lived there for 15 years and I worked in, you know, bars and restaurants for the majority of that time. And I got really disconnected from it. And I wouldn't say, I'm kind of a reformed nature hater. I always thought I was kind of like an indoor person. But simultaneously, I think I realized living in a city, you really see the waste, right? So my parents live in South Dakota now. They live on the edge of a national park in kind of 20 miles from anywhere situation. And the attitude in that community is that there's like, not that many people. So like a little bit of like nobody recycles because it's not that big of a deal because there's so much nature. And I think like I really saw working in bars and restaurants in New York City, you just like, you touch like 1,000 bottles you're throwing away every day, or you saran wrap hundreds of bottles every night because you're, you know, cleaning the speed pours and putting tiny bits of plastic on thousands of things. And I think over the course of my career, it really kind of, that feeling just built up. Like we need to do something. We need to be better about this. And I don't know, I mean, there's statistics that say we've got 7 years to save the planet, or 7 years that we can, you know, change something to reduce or reverse some of the climate change that we've had as a species. And I think a lot of that is, you know, we're a culture of convenience, and you guys both kind of touched on that. We pay a really big price for that convenience. And I just read David Attenborough's new book, and that's like in the sort of foreword of the book is this kind of call to action, like, hey, we're a modern human society now. More of us live in cities than don't, which is kind of a crazy thought if you think about the expanse of the world. So not only are we doing like a ton of harm to the planet with all of our convenience and our plastic and all that kind of stuff, but also we're becoming more and more disconnected and more unhappy as a whole society because we live in these urban cities and we don't touch nature. And so those kind of factors, I think, have really become part of my like day-to-day job at Seedlip, which is to kind of help bring the nature back to the bar industry and bring the nature back, you know, to people that maybe aren't, you know, as aware of what's around them as they could be. And there's so many things, there's so many layers of this. I think, you know, access to nature is a privilege too, and not everybody has it. And figuring out how to change that, I think, is a huge task that we have as a society as well. Yeah, I know that was kind of roundabout. I hope I answered your question.
No, you did. I really appreciate your input and all of that. I think for me, the connection to nature really came as a lifeline, as kind of a last resort. Like you growing up in Colorado, nature was just everywhere. Town of 1,000 people, just forests as far as the eye can see. Fast forwarding now, I go home and it doesn't look like home because of all the California wildfires. Growing up my whole life there, the wildfires were always yeah, the air quality was bad or the environment was affected, but it was kind of swept under the rug because, again, it wasn't affecting people. It wasn't affecting townships or cities. And you're seeing just how far the environmental impact has gone to it's now I go to a place that I love and I cherish and have so many fond memories of, and it's just barren. It looks like another world. And that's fast forward. But I think for me, nature was a lifeline in just kind of the toxic way that bars and restaurants operated, moving from environmental to the social aspect of it and the intertwining of the two. In the hospitality field, I have the privilege of living in Sacramento, for which has is known as the city of trees, and it's also known as farm to fork capital. We have so many trees and we have so rich and fertile soil to grow so much of varieties of food and support populations outside of our state in a grand manner. And that is something that we preach, and that is something that we put on taglines. But where is the community in actually backing that up? Where is it more than just face value and selling tickets to dinners and taking stock and looking around and realizing you can't have hospitality when everyone's just struggling to keep their head above water, and having chefs who throw pans and having bartenders who talk to barbacks like they're nothing, and seeing this being perpetuated in a sense that was really the opposite of trying to have this reverence for nature when we can't have reverence for humanity and our coworkers. And it was that burnout for me, that work-life balance where it just kind of overtook. And growing up with nature like you was just kind of secondhand. It was camping and it was hiking and it was all these things that we were kind of drugged out in the forest to do as kids that we didn't really have any appreciation for. And after being inside and being indoors and working the 80 hours and seeing the food waste and seeing just how people are treating each other, it wasn't until I luckily had the ability and the resources to go outside and kind of sit with myself and sit with my thoughts and come back to the table and say, how can I do this different, not only for myself, but for the community at large around me? How can I start small and start making impacts that can trickle up or down and change the day to day? So for me, what that is taking people who maybe are uncomfortable, who don't have prior experience, or who just don't know what to look for, and they're having a hard day or a hard week, or they're getting burnt out, and taking them to somewhere beautiful and serene and quiet and letting them have a moment, and then seeing how that really affects them back at work, whether it's 30 minutes at a park, whether it's an hour river walk, which Sacramento luckily has a convergence of two major rivers in California, or whether that's, having 72 hours in a national park like Yosemite, and seeing how that comes back and how they view the products that they're touching different. Are they being more respectful with their mint use? Are they understanding where the mint comes from because they see it growing wild on the riverbanks? California also has a ton of citrus. Are they just wasting the citrus juice, or are they realizing that when you have to squeeze 12 liters of citrus for a Friday service and you touch every single one of those lemons and limes or oranges, are you more respectful of that, or are you just wasting it again? And seeing how that kind of tunes in. Monica, with your vast experience between being behind a bar to your to pour to your liquor company, what are you seeing as far as the first steps in getting people to like really light up and connect, or seeing how issues that they have in today's work world and how it's made a difference between either connecting to nature and farms or recreationally?
I think it's many things. I think first I would say that it kind of, I know Lauren mentioned it earlier, but the kind of notion that sustainability is mostly focused around nature, we also need to, you know, consider that ultimately what is it that everyone wants? And for me, I think that is happiness. And I think that it's very unlikely that you can get your team to perform however you want them to perform unless they also are happy. And happiness, it comes with certain things, because you know, you first have to look at are they feeling secure financially? So we need to reform how we pay our staff. I think especially in this industry, we need to also think about how much we push them to work, or as you say, the condition, you know. And I've worked 20 plus years in this industry, and I have learned a lot of things that I do like about this industry, and also throughout the years I've learned a lot of things that I don't like about this industry. And all of these things have made me make my choices for how I run my businesses. And for in my businesses, you know, I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna, we have this expression in Norway where we say you sew pillows under people's arms. And you make life very easy, and that's just, it's not necessarily doing someone a favor, you're doing them a disfavor almost, because you take away their ability to kind of experience life and get through life on their own. So, you know, definitely we have to push our teams and our staffs and our co-workers, but we also need to do it in a respectful way so that they actually take away something positive from it. So yes, for example, for us, what we for example do in the bar, we don't drink at work, which sounds very strange in some places because everyone drinks when they're working in bars, but we don't drink at bars. Maybe we do occasional cheers if something big happens or if a guest comes in, but you know, we also, and most of our staff, they are on bicycles, so they use their bicycles to come to work and from work, and they all are part of the prep, so they all like receive the vegetables and fruits, and they see everything throughout the whole process of, you know, cleaning to serving the cocktail. Since we always have a very kind of democratic way of creating cocktails, everyone has to sign off on a drink before it can be put on the menu. And since we change the menu every day, it is a kind of continuous process where there's always work, there's always preps, and we do a lot of changing between the kitchen and the bar. So, you know, the bar staff, they, for example, they do shifts occasionally in the kitchen, and the kitchen, they do trainings with us. So nobody is not familiar with everyone. So we just work really hard to kind of break down the barriers and the kind of old relationship between bar and kitchen. And, you know, where we also took it all the way from the beginning of how to design the bar. You know, there's no hidden places in our bar, so there's nowhere that you can raise your voice without the whole room knowing. There's no back of house, there's no, you know, there's guests everywhere, and we just don't have any tolerance for shouting, for screaming, for disrespecting people in any ways, you know. So I think that it always starts that small, and it gets bigger, and it's that simple, but it's also that difficult, because the only thing that will improve it and will make it work is actually the cheapest but also the most expensive ingredient there is, and that is time. You know, giving people time and spending time with them. That's the only way I think you can make sure that people get what they want, because it's so different from each individual as well.
I agree. I think at least in bars that I've worked at, a lot of the younger bartenders coming up really look towards their mentors and their bosses to really take stock and invest in them. And granted, it has to be a give and take, but I think at least with California, I think that those people have so many duties and responsibilities on their plate that the mentorship or the time or the energy towards the younger staff is really not available because of the responsibilities and the workloads by their mentors and bosses. Um, Amy, what do you think your first steps are, and like the experiences you've had in the bars that you've worked in and just in your personal life, and people that you've seen struggle and kind of ebb and flow through positive and negatives, yourself included, and what do you see the beneficial first steps being?
Beneficial first steps. What a question.
Beneficial first steps, or like what do you see solutions to, whether it's knowledge and education you've given yourself or community outreach, or what have you seen just making a great impact?
Absolutely. I think that one of the most important things is that it really needs to come from the employer. It definitely, I mean, obviously you have your own individual agency, and taking your own personal steps in your personal life is important. But one of the more impactful quotes was from Danny Meyer's Setting the Table, which I'm sure anyone who's in the industry has read. But something that really stuck with me, and it was really only in the first couple of pages, he said that you will, I'm parsing words here, but he essentially said that you will revolutionize your business when you start treating your employees like volunteers. And that to me was so important. Really recognizing that the people that you have around you are there because they want to be, a part of your team. And so creating that internal culture where you are supportive of people taking recess, of people getting outside, of people taking their mental health days. Because especially in this industry, I mean, when you're on 24/7, it is exhausting. And I have seen a lot of people just burn out and leave the industry entirely. But I am very hopeful in that I've seen a lot of organizations recently, like Focus on Health. There are even at Tales of the Cocktail last year, there were lots of seminars that were like very intentionally focused on like personal sustainability and making sure that you are taking care of yourself first and foremost. Now, all of those seminars were offered for free, and they were definitely the least attended of the seminars, but they were there. And that is a really important step towards really highlighting the importance of making sure that we are taking care of ourselves, and that setting boundaries is incredibly important. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, no, it absolutely did. Because I think overall it comes back to community, right? Bars are watering holes for community. It's where people go to be seen, to be acknowledged, to meet new people, to interact, to share ideas, to tell stories, regardless of what side of the bar you're on. And so I think having those communities where people feel safe, where people feel seen, where people feel supported, where people feel that they are economically secure and they have that stress at least minimized so they can proceed further. And I think that at the end of the day, taking care of nature and taking care of the people around us is community. And even with COVID and things being separate and distanced, those communities are more important than ever, not just for our mental health and our sanity, but also for continuing the conversations of conservation and sustainability and longevity of our world around us and longevity of ourselves and our careers. And so I think going back to that community is absolutely central to everything that we do, and how it impacts others around us.
Absolutely.
Laura, what does a world without this look like? A world without the connection to the environment, to the product that we're putting out, a world without the respective community that we've been talking about?
Yeah, I have to predict the doom. No, I mean, I think that, I think I totally agree with everything that's been said. And I think something that has come up for me recently, and this is very Seedlip specific, but I give a lot of presentations to, distributors and bartenders and customers. And I always, our motto at Seedlip is, we're what to drink when you're not drinking. And I get a lot of like, well, what's the point? And I think back to what you were just saying about community, like, I think if the last 8-9 months have taught us anything as a collective, it's that, community and having a drink or going to a bar is about a lot more than alcohol. There's this huge social kind of like support system and network that are kind of based around our hospitality institutions. And, I think that without that, we've all been suffering. It's Zoom is great, but it's not the same as being in person and giving someone a hug and sharing a drink. And I think that I was talking to some of the people at Lush Life once about programming that we were working on for Portland Cocktail Week, and they said we started this sustainability tract within Portland Cocktail Week, and we meant for it to be how to make more sustainable cocktails, but ultimately what ended up happening is human sustainability kind of crept in, and we realized that that's something that this industry is really, really lacking or needing support in. And those things go hand in hand. So to answer your question, I think, we can't afford to ignore any side of this issue. We can't afford to think of like sustainable cocktails as a trend that was like 2018 and now we're on to whatever the newest thing is. Like, that is an intrinsic part of like how we are going to get a better planet and also a better industry, but also we have to treat our employees better and we have to pay people fairly and we have to look at tip structure, and all of these things are just all connected. And I think that sustainability is human, and humans are nature, so it's also nature, and I think those things go hand in hand.
Absolutely. Everything does go hand in hand. And looking at the trend of before COVID of alcohol sales kind of dipping, and the thoughts of whether it's a new cultural change, whether it's because there are more decriminalized, whether it's marijuana or mushrooms, and people leaning more towards that, or just being more responsibility in their consumption. I work at a bar called The Snug in Sacramento, and we sell a ton of Seedlip. It's not only on the menu as non-alcoholic offerings and cocktails, but we also add them to our spirit-based cocktails as something that's either lower ABV or to really just bump up the flavor, like having a Tritter Ricky with the Garden, half an ounce in it, to cutting it down and just really amplifying those flavors. And to see people order it time and time again unprompted, the longer we have it on the menu, and to see them sit with their friends and not feel any sort of shame or separation, and to have a cocktail in their hand that's beautiful, that tastes amazing, and lets them be involved, I think is a really great opportunity that you're seeing more and more come on the market and trend. And I think it is really diverse. But you can't pour from an empty cup. We're there to make people have a good time and feel comfortable and at ease. And if we can't do that for ourselves or for our staff, then I feel like it's a really hard disconnect. Yeah. But Monica, is there anywhere, I mean, I know that most of us on this panel are from the US, with the exception of you. Are there any companies that you're working with that you feel are really kind of pushing the boundaries of either connection and sustainability with products in the environment, or even with connecting humans to each other? Because the environment is impactful, right? I mean, spending 72 hours out in nature, it increases your creativity as well as the receptors, your sensory receptors. So it increases your palate, it increases, your taste and your smell and your acuity of the things that are around you. So are there any companies in Europe that you're just really stoked on to see what they're doing and what's coming up next?
I think there's several companies that are very interconnected with nature, and I think that something that I've been very kind of wanting to have a discussion about for a long time is looking at kind of drinks and alcohol, but also drinks in general, more like part of culture. So would you treat drinks and cocktails differently if you could talk about the ecology of drinking rather than getting drunk? You know, if you look back, how important have alcohol been for our culture? Because all of the best ingredients, all of the best grains, they always went not to bread, not to, you know, cakes, but went to making beer or making eventually whiskey, you know. So drinking is not the enemy here. It's just how we kind of look at drinks that has changed. But if we go back and kind of focuses on, you know, not just the terroir, but also the occasions. And then all of a sudden, in that context, you start to see why the different cultures are how they are. But to answer the question, yes, for example, you have a gin company that we work a lot with called Heppel. They come from the north of England. And the reason why we work so much with them is because when we decided that we wanted to open our bar, we wanted to challenge the way that spirits are delivered. So for example, with Heppel and some other of our brands, we buy in bulk. So they deliver in 25-liter jerry cans to us. And the jerry cans we reuse afterwards. So we don't have to deal with all of the bottles, because we don't need the bottles. You know, we have a back bar that is never changing because we only use our own bottles, because I don't want the clutter and the kind of branding in my bar. I want to have a bar that challenges the concept of flavor, and to do that in the way that I need to do, I need to take away all of the familiar, that's my favorite vodka, that's my favorite bourbon. So here you already come and say, oh, I don't see anything that I recognize, which means that I'm forced to try something else. So, you know, you have to put people in the kind of mindset that they're willing to do what you want them to do. And, you know, in the beginning, when we went to all of the brands and said, hey, can you supply us in jerry cans? They just like, no, it's not possible. It's not possible. It's not possible. And eventually, more and more people got on the train or in the bus or whatever the expression is, and they said, yes, we can do it. So now, for example, we get our bourbon is Maker's Mark, and they do the same. They supply us in bulk, so we don't have to deal with the bottles. It took more than 1.5 years from the first idea till we had the kind of first 5-liter jerry can. Because it also, of course, we work with alcohol, so we have to have a kind of technology that allows alcohol to be shipped in containers that don't seep out in the alcohol, where the alcohol doesn't break down the kind of lining. So it's not always simple, but the fact that people are now willing to do it is amazing, you know. So I think, yeah, when there's a will, there's a way. It's just about changing people's mindset into saying, yes, let's do it, rather than no, that's impossible. Because, you know, if I had £1 every time someone said it's impossible, I would be very, very rich now, you know. So yeah, instead of being closed for our second lockdown. No, I'm joking, sorry. No, I'm definitely, there's a lot of very intelligent and very innovative people working in alcohol brands, and that's, you know, one of the kind of privileges that we all have is that we get to, you know, work with them very closely, because I don't know, London is a city where there's a lot of big kind of head offices, and we get to take advantage of that, you know. So we're definitely very lucky. And, you know, some companies, like for example Heppel, they go even further. So now they are reintroducing like livestock to the distillery estate, so it's becoming like a completely kind of biodiverse, back to nature estate where they don't intervene whatsoever, you know, and only when they go up in the moors to pick the junipers, they would kind of make their marks. But you know, it's very interesting. And you know, people also doubted in the beginning, like how can you have a bar in UK that has only one gin? How will people react to that? You know what? People are fine, you know, because we just say, this is the gin we want, this is the gin we prefer, and we're giving it to you because of this reason. So I don't know. I think it's very interesting how the landscape of cocktails and drinking has changed quite a lot over the last couple of years. And I definitely think that, you know, as sustainability and kind of this connectiveness to the land becomes more important for more brands, I hope, or I can only hope, that at least most of them will do it because they really care and not because it's a great marketing campaign, which unfortunately also sometimes is the reason why. So yeah.
Yeah, so I'm the new Karina now, but I totally agree with that logic and that sentiment. I think it has to be something that you just want to do, right? It's the same with anything else we do when we're talking about health and wellness. It has to come from within. You know, if I don't want to lose the weight, I'm not going to work out or whatever it may be. Amy, I'm definitely interested in your thoughts, and whether that is specific to Vermont or DC or, you know, anywhere really. What organizations or people do you think are doing some really great work to advocate for environmental wellness?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that the list is very long for me. Having being especially in Vermont, it feels like everyone is doing something. But there are definitely a few people who are really taking the extra initiative, which is really wonderful to see. For example, Bar Hill, who I work with, they are absolutely incredible people, founded by a farmer and a beekeeper who really was pushing for raw honey in the 80s, back when raw honey was not on anyone's shelves, and really continuing to push for having a fair price for farmers, but also this real sense of environmental sustainability and agricultural responsibility is so wildly important. Having enough solar energy in the distillery to entirely offset everything from our gin production, having all of our stillage go to a biodigester that ends up powering an entire neighboring town. And but this is something that's very it's often not in their talking points because it's so natural to them. The Alchemist is a very popular brewery up in Vermont. They make Hetty Topper, which was rated one of the best beers in the world for several years. And but they never really wanted that kind of fame, but they realized that so this is something they said that stuck with me so much, was that they had the ability to make a difference and to make an impact, and therefore they had the responsibility to do so. So they're really leading the charge in making sure that they are providing for their staff, but also making sure that everything is entirely sustainable within their brewery. And all of the extra energy credits that they have at their brewery actually get donated to a nursing home, so that which is nearby. And it's just such a wonderful sense of community. But even here in DC, I've found some really incredible organizations that I've been really lucky to partner with. For example, City Blossoms is a local nonprofit organization here in DC that really intentionally creates these gardening green spaces in neighborhoods where kids and families may not necessarily otherwise have access to that kind of space, which allows kids to have access to this fresh produce and really, like, again, as we've been talking about, like that intimacy with nature, and really like understanding where your food is coming from and where your nutrients are coming from, and watching those plants grow and really getting a really in-depth understanding of the world that we live in and how everything is so interconnected. And it's so important at such a young age. So that's one of some of my favorite organizations to partner with and to highlight and to really support are the ones that are really pushing forth with education, because I mean, the children are definitely, I mean, they're our future, right? And making sure that we all grow up with such an understanding of nature and why it's so important to take care of it is really essential.
Yeah, no, I love that. That's amazing. I learned some new places to support now. What about you, Laura? What are your thoughts about that, especially, you know, with California not being a territory I'm familiar with? I'm definitely interested in seeing if you have any shout outs.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many incredible companies here. I was going to particularly, on that note, what you were saying, Amy, one of the partners that we've had at Seedlip and someone who I think is doing really cool stuff in LA is the gangster gardener, Ron Finley. He has an awesome masterclass. If you guys have masterclass, you can check out his classes, but he's doing a sort of a similar concept, which is, you know, bringing community gardens to inner city LA. And I think that, you know, you can check out his Ron Finley project is really, really cool. And that initiative I think is super important. California has a bounty of nature, but that doesn't mean that everyone who lives here gets to access it. So I think that's really cool. And then this is not California specific, but I'm obsessed with Bolt Threads. They are making sustainable fashion out of biomaterial. And I think they've got like this mushroom leather that is super cool. I'm really excited to see. I think, you know, I know we're talking about the hospitality industry, but fashion industry has a big impact on our planet as well. And so I'm excited to see kind of like the innovation that comes out of that sector as well.
That's amazing. And we're going to be wrapping up here shortly, but just wanted to go back around the room once more and get 1 or 2 sentences from all of you about what a takeaway that you hope everyone who's watching can get from, you know, what we've discussed today. So I'll start with Monica and then we'll go Amy and Laura.
Yes, I will finish by recommending 3 books that I think everyone should read because it's very hands-on, and that would be one, In Defense of Food, and Omnivore's Dilemma, which is both written by Michael Pollan, and then the last one is a book that is mandatory for all of our new starts to read together with Setting the Table, and that is Third Plate by Dan Barber, because I think the 3 of them will give you a much better understanding of the kind of journey from seed to plate or glass, depending, but also why like there's different roads to take and not all of them are the same.
Amy, what about you?
Thank you for those recommendations, Monica. There are so many wonderful resources out there. A few of my favorites recently have been, well, first of all, this book, The Power of Habit by Charles Duhigg, I believe is how you pronounce his last name. This is an absolutely incredible book to really help more with personal sustainability, which was something that I know we were talking about. And I also just really want to harp on also the importance of your environment, which was something that we talked about, making sure that everything around you is like really intentional and how much that can really impact your space. For example, like in Vermont, we are have all billboards are illegal. So that creates this really intentional space where, so we're not seeing advertisements when we are traveling through the state, and instead you're really just in nature. And that is something that is so beautiful and something that you don't even really recognize, but really helps to like contribute and add to your space. Something that I've been doing a lot is I've been buying probably too many plants, but keeping the space around me like feel really alive, and being really intentional about putting music on, because I know that that makes me really happy, but also being intentional also about the people who I choose to support, where I choose to spend my money, taking the extra couple of seconds to make sure that where I'm buying my food from, who I'm buying my food from, who I'm buying anything from is a company that I want to be supporting and giving my money to is absolutely essential. Yes. And last but certainly not least, podcasts are absolutely wonderful. There's a brand new podcast that has recently come out, I believe like a little over a month ago. It's called How to Save a Planet. And one of my favorite things about this podcast is it talks about it really goes into depth about a lot of the environmental issues that we've been talking about today, from a climate perspective in particular. But at the end of each episode, they have very actionable steps that you can take and ways that you can actually make an impact in your community. And it's not all doomsday, because we do have the ability to affect positive change. So this is a really impactful podcast, and you don't need to know a ton to be able to understand and comprehend it, and you can make a difference.
All right, Laura, and what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I think on that same note, I think my thoughts are, I mean, there's so many resources out there, you know, books and podcasts. I think that it can feel really daunting to think that, you know, the little tiny things to think about every part of what you do every day and the impact it might have, and be like, oh, I'm not even going to try. Like this is such a task. But I think, you know, starting small and realizing that nobody's perfect, but we're all kind of like educating ourselves and making efforts, putting our money where our mouth is, supporting brands that support the things we believe in, and, you know, and taking time to read and listen. And education is key. So taking time to like absorb that information is a huge step. And then I think my parting note is there's actually a bacterium in soil that's good for your mental health. You can read all about it in much more depth than I'm able to explain, but just literally going outside and putting your hands in some dirt, or in your potted plant, buying a plant for your apartment, getting yourself a little more connected to nature is going to help with everything that we're all dealing with right now, but also just, you know, as humans for our own future sustainability. I think put your hands in some dirt. That's my parting words.
I love that. That's going to be the quote we promote this panel with. Put your hands in some dirt. Well, I want to thank each of you for being here. Karina Martinez, Monica Berg, Amy Dunkey, and Laura Lashley. It's been a really wonderful conversation and discussion, and we will be seeing this posted in January. So it's gonna be great. So thank you all for being here. All right, bye.
Thank you. Bye.